Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for Swamp Thing. But before I get into Wes Craven's Swamp Thing, I want to talk to you about Wandering Witch Publishing. This is a newly formed publishing company that specializes in poetry, short stories, and novels, both for your submission as well as public consumption. But this upstart company needs a little bit of help to get up and started. Wandering Witch Publishing is a space for growth where imaginative thinkers come together to challenge perspectives by engaging with counterculture through magical realism and real magicalism. This is something that I'm very, very excited about, and with your help, you can contribute to this excellent publishing company's success. I have a link for the GoFundMe page set up by the organizer and creator down below, as well as a link to the website where you can read more and maybe even submit some of your own work if you have something that you deem worthy of submission. This is a newly formed publishing company that can help you get your voice heard, and that's incredibly powerful. So I encourage you to take a look at that, but moving on to the review at hand, I'm here to talk to you about Wes Craven's Swamp Thing. This is a movie that kind of is forgotten in the DC pantheon. When most people think of early DC movies, they think of the Richard Donner Superman ones, the Michael Keaton Batmans, or maybe even the Adam West and George Reeves TV shows and their respective movies for Superman and Batman. But nobody really talks too much about Swamp Thing, and that's a bit of a shame because this movie is good in a lot of respects. I think there's a quote within the film that kind of perfectly summates how I feel about this film. At one point, Adrienne Barbeau, her character Cable, is meeting Swamp Thing for the first time as he's holding out an orchid for her to like grab a hold of, and he says to her in the most somber of voices as he's looking at her, "Much beauty in the swamp, if only you look." And that's how I feel about this film. This film has budgetary limitations that are inescapable. I believe this was made for a mere $1 million and had to look like it was made for $10 million, some of which succeeds, some of which doesn't. It was operating off of a tone that had to be as kind of earnest and grounded as Superman, the Donner Superman movies was, while also being a little more science fiction, science horror based, where Craven, I think, was kind of the perfect filmmaker for this job, having one foot in both worlds. He comes from a horror background, so he's able to make some of those horrific moments really resonate and gel, but he's always wanted to make movies that weren't horror movies. He looks for the beauty of he looks for the beauty within the ugliness, and he is able to offer that forward. And he's not often given an opportunity to do so, but most of his movies you kind of find that is a basic groundwork for what he's trying to get at oftentimes. Is there's an awful lot of ugliness in our world, and he's trying to find the beauty within it. And this movie has that, and he is able to capture some of that Superman earnestness in the film as well. But the two tones don't always collide expertly. Sometimes there's a bit of clashing in the horror and the... I think the villains particularly are quite ghastly at times. Weirdly, often enough when they're in their human form. Krug from Last House on the Left, David Hess, returns in this film as the heavy for the first half of the film, as like this military guy that's trying to take things down, and he's quite brutal and crude with all the characters he comes in contact with, as if he is maybe like a brother of the character from Last House on the Left, and he plays it really really well. But he has this real world cruelty that he is bringing to the otherwise kind of lighthearted story around him, or characters around him that feel more based in a comic book world rather than his real world ugliness or a caricature of that. But it's a solid performance. Ray Wise and oh god, I can't remember who plays Swamp Thing. Ray Wise plays Swamp Thing before he becomes the Swamp Thing. Dick Durek plays Swamp Thing once he is in the costume. And this is sort of a science gone amok story, as a lot of early comic books were. This feels kind of similar to an EC kind of tone to it. EC Comics rather than DC. In that you have a human who is given, turned into a monster. Due to like the folly of his own making. And the Swamp Thing costume itself looks pretty good. If memory serves, this was a film that was filmed in sequential order because they only had one costume with which they could make. And so as bits start falling off of it, because you're filming in the swamp, the thing started dying. They needed to film it in order. So in the beginning, he's able to have quite a bit free range of movement, and then by the end of it, he and the monster that he's battling have the slappiest fight. However, that final fight, I will say, does have weight to it, not through the visuals of the fight. It's quite, as I say, just very slappy and looks like it's undercranked, and it's not impressive in that sense. However, there's a mortality to it, or that is brought to it, that makes it have weight, and that comes from the writing. I think ultimately this is a well-written script that didn't have the faith in applying the budget that they really needed for it to soar. Craven being a good, and at that time good enough, filmmaker to make it land is a testament to his skill. However, because the action, especially in the first half of the movie, a lot of the gunplay and stuff, which Craven isn't necessarily familiar with, is done really well. It's quite thrilling. I'd say the first half of this movie is the best half of the movie. And quite honestly, the turning point where the film kind of suffers is a last act issue. Really, that last 30 minutes or so is a little uneven when Cable and Swamp Thing are captured and shunted off into the mansion, and then there's a lot of weirdness happening at that mansion, and then the sort of wolf pig-like creature that manifests to battle Swamp Thing. That's where the movie is least successful, but the first half and really 2/3 of the movie are good. Well shot, engaging, interesting characters, likable characters. Jude, I think, is my favorite character. If I were to read the screenplay, I am sure that is the case. He has the funniest lines. He has, he's witty. He's just, you want more of him as written. As performed, I believe the actor's name was Reggie Batts, is possibly the most wooden and stiff performer I've ever seen in my entire life. Not necessarily sure how he got that job, but he does have a charm to him, in the sense that he can't act, but you can tell he's trying, but you're maybe a little convinced that he's not actually even trying, which gives it its own charm. But if you read his lines, they're good lines. They're funny. They're great. He's a character you want more of. He's just so poorly performed. And I'm sorry, Reggie Batts, if you're out there listening to this. It's something that needed to be commented on. But more power to you. You got to be in a Wes Craven movie. That's a dream of mine that I'll never be able to achieve. So anyway, I like the movie. The first half is really good. The action is strong. The science gone amok elements of it is really good. It's compelling. It has a heart and a humanity to it that is found within the story, within the ugliness of the story, which is really something that Craven tries to get down to at the core of a lot of his films. As an early Wes Craven film, this one's kind of vital. It may not have the prestige of The Hills Have Eyes or the talking points of Last House on the Left, but of his early 5 movies pre-Nightmare on Elm Street, this one is one that I think is oft forgotten, and it shouldn't be. And then separating it from the Craven of it all is the DC. This is a movie that I think is better than Superman 2. This is a movie that I think is better than the 1960s Batman. Sure, it's not as good as Richard Donner's Superman. Most movies aren't. But for early DC and early comic book movies in general, this captures the tone of what those early comics were like, both DC and EC comics. The 50s comics, where monsters are the front and center superpower that you're either trying to root for or overcome. And the thing that's most compelling within this movie is the fact that Swamp Thing himself is kind of an anti-horror movie monster, in the sense that horror movie slashers, and you got Wes Craven, the master of the slasher filmmakers, alongside John Carpenter. Adrian Barbeau was married to Carpenter at one time. But you have Wes Craven making this movie. And how is Swamp Thing photographed? I'd say through 80% of this film, Swamp Thing is photographed by light of day. Exactly opposite of what you'd get in a traditional slasher. But he is also somebody who lurks around. You have the bad guys looking around, trying to find, and like wandering off alone, and Swamp Thing comes out of nowhere off screen and grabs him. He operates under the same editing techniques that you would use for a slasher, for a Jason, a Michael Myers, the dude that's lurking just around the corner, who gets his prey. But this time, it's the hero who's swooping in and getting the villain prey and taking them down. It's an anti-slasher movie made by the master of slashers of the 80s and 90s. And that's kind of genius, and something that is worth talking about. Oftentimes people don't. They're kind of dismissive of this movie, or it's forgotten because of its low budget, because of its kind of wonky final 20-ish minutes. But much beauty in the swamp, if only you look for it. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and make sure you check out down below about Wandering Witch production or Wandering Witch Publishing. See if it's something that you're interested in, maybe helping out and donating as well. Have a good one, and let me know what you think of Swamp Thing in the comments down below. Peace.